All right, today we're going to break down a really bizarre legal drama. It involves a famous journalist, a team of prosecutors, and a single judge who stopped them cold. And what this whole mess reveals? Well, it shines a light on a powerful, hidden part of our justice system. So let's just start with the central puzzle here, the question that kicks off this whole investigation. I mean, think about it. Why would the full force of the US government try to arrest a well known journalist, only to have their entire case shut down by one single judge? Doesn't quite add up, right? And it all begins with the very, very strange case of journalist Don Lemon. Okay, so here's the play-by-play. On January 18th, 2026, Don Lemon is on the job covering a protest that's happening inside a church. Almost immediately after, the Department of Justice goes into overdrive and tries to get an arrest warrant for him. But then, the whole thing just stops. A federal magistrate, Judge Douglas Miko, takes one look at the warrant and refuses to sign it. Now, you have to understand the charges they were throwing at him were no joke. They actually pulled out the KKK Act, a law designed to fight violent hate groups, and the FACE Act, which is meant to stop people from physically blocking access to places of worship. Their argument, that Lemon, a journalist just being there with a camera, was somehow an act of force. And to top it all off, they tried to rush this through by claiming it was a national security emergency. So what did the judge do? Well, his response was incredibly blunt. He literally took a pen, crossed out the charges on the warrant, and just wrote two words: no probable cause. He basically told the prosecutors, I don't see any threat here, I don't see any force. Now, in the legal world, a judge shutting down prosecutors this directly, it's just something you almost never see. And that brings us to the really crucial question. Why did the DOJ try this clumsy, direct approach? The normal path for a serious charge like this is to go to a grand jury. So why'd they skip it? Well, the answer reveals something deeply cynical about how the justice system actually works. So the simple spin, the thing you probably heard in the news, was that the DOJ knew their case was weak and they were afraid a grand jury would see right through it and reject it. But there's a much more fascinating theory. The real reason might be the exact opposite. They didn't avoid the grand jury because they feared losing. They avoided it because they knew they would win, way too easily. And pushing such a ridiculous case through a grand jury would expose the whole system as a sham. You know, there's this famous saying in legal circles that just perfectly captures this whole problem. A New York judge once famously said that prosecutors have so much influence over a grand jury that they could get them to indict a ham sandwich. And this is what we're calling the grand jury gambit. It's when the government actively avoids a grand jury, not because they're afraid of losing, but because getting an easy win on a really weak case would pull back the curtain and show everyone that the grand jury is just a rubber stamp for whatever the prosecutor wants. It's a strategic move to protect their most powerful tool by not using it too obviously. Now, to really understand this gambit and why it's so important, we have to take a step back and look at what the grand jury was originally supposed to be versus what it is today. See, the founders had this incredible vision for the grand jury. It was meant to be a shield for the people, right? A buffer standing between an individual and an overreaching government. They called it the conscience of the community. But today, well, as you can see, that vision has been completely turned on its head. It now basically functions as an arm of the prosecution, hearing only the evidence the prosecutor wants them to hear, all in secret. And look, this isn't just a feeling or a theory. We have the data to prove it. Historically, grand juries acted as a real check on power. They used to reject about a quarter of all the cases that prosecutors brought to them. Think about that. 1 in 4 cases were stopped before they could even start. That filtering function was absolutely essential. So keeping that 25%, that 1 in 4 number in your head, what do you think the rejection rate is today in the federal system? Take a guess. The rejection rate today has just fallen off a cliff. It is less than 0.1%. Federal grand juries indict in over 99.9% of cases. The shield is gone. It's become a formality, not a filter. So the next logical question is, how is that even possible? I mean, how can one side win 99.9% of the time in a system that's supposed to be fair? The answer is in the prosecutor's playbook. It really comes down to a pretty simple 3-step strategy that gives them total information control. First, they only have to present the evidence that helps their case. They have no obligation to show the grand jurors anything that might suggest the person is innocent. Second, the prosecutor is the only lawyer in the room. They explain the law to the jurors. And third, all of this happens in complete secrecy. There's no judge,
and no defense attorney to object or to offer a different side of the story.
And maybe the most insidious part of all this is what it allows prosecutors to do. Because the outcome is basically guaranteed, the grand jury becomes a tool for, well, laundering responsibility. A prosecutor can bring a really weak or politically motivated case, and when people ask why, they can just throw up their hands and say, hey, I didn't make the decision, a jury of their peers did. It gives their actions a phony democratic seal of approval. And this brings us to the final and most crucial takeaway: why this broken, rubber-stamped grand jury system should matter to every single one of us.
Because when an indictment is all but guaranteed, the government gains the power to inflict devastating punishment on someone without ever having to win a trial. Just the indictment itself can destroy your reputation, get your assets frozen, and bury you in a mountain of legal debt. Years of your life are consumed. The process itself becomes the punishment. And the threat of that process punishment is so overwhelming, so immense, that it forces over 90% of federal defendants to plead guilty. Think about that. Most aren't even admitting they did it. They're just surrendering to a system where the cost of fighting, even if you're innocent, is just too high to bear.
So this leaves us with a really fundamental and frankly, a pretty chilling question. The founders gave us the grand jury to act as a shield for the citizen, but if that shield has been reforged into a weapon for the state, what's left to protect us?